For a smidge over a year, I've been tethered to the dark depths of the 911 dispatch center. Now, it's a job all right, and not the gold mine people think it is. The night shifts are grueling, almost vampiric. And being a university dropout with a penchant for bad decisions, this is where I found myself. When a desperate voice screams through the phone for an ambulance, I'm the ear at the other end. People romanticize my job, the thrill of it. Most days, it's an incessant drone of impatient souls wailing about their delayed ambulance like they ordered a damn sandwich. But sometimes, the shadows deepen. Once in a while, it's a choking victim, a life hanging on a mere thread, or an old soul battling a betrayed heart. I've held the line while frantic folks performed CPR on their kin, a grim symphony of life and death playing out in my ears. And kids? Those calls are the worst. Yet, time here is an elusive companion. One call ends, another begins, with moments of grace sprinkled in between. A grateful mom, a tearful old lady, and my crown jewels. Those 3 babies I've brought into the world over the line. The moments of triumph amidst chaos. And of course, there are the loons, the deranged, the unhinged. But unlike the cops, we can't just disconnect, even if they're hurling obscenities. The rules dictate we call back, tethering us in a maddening dance. Then there was that call. One night, while still under the wing of Christopher, a grizzled veteran of 18 months at the dispatch, my initiation to the center's unspeakable came. My colleagues had advanced, while I felt trapped, my progress stunted. Why, when my calls were the very model of protocol? Suddenly a chilling beep echoed, and as I braced myself, a cold, detached voice muttered, "This is a test call." Before I could respond, Christopher, with an urgency I'd never seen, muted me. I shot him a quizzical look, my mind racing. 5 eternal seconds later, that voice returned, colder. Test call failed. Christopher, his face a shade paler, halted any incoming calls. Anna, our control manager, grimly marked the board. The 6th such call for April, and we were only halfway in. Christopher's weary eyes beckoned me to a quieter room. "Your training's over," he said, not with pride, but with an air of melancholy. Concerned, I wondered if I'd made an unforgivable error. But looking into Christopher's eyes, I understood. Graduating wasn't cause for celebration. Not here. "Natalie," he said gravely, "we never engage with the test calls. Silence, always." As I grappled with Christopher's chilling words, a persistent question danced in my head. But what if I'd given the address? The weight of the situation settled heavily on me, rendering me cold. Christopher's eyes, deep wells of experience, settled on me. There's a brief window, just 5 seconds from when they announce it's a test call to the chilling closure of test call failed. If you don't utter a sound, you remain untouched. I forced a chuckle, trying to alleviate the tension, the absurdity of it all. This is some sort of twisted initiation, isn't it? A peculiar rite of passage for the newbies, making me believe there's a ghost in the machine? But Christopher's stone-cold visage was unmoving. "This isn't a game," he whispered, the dire seriousness echoing in his voice. "There have been handlers before you. When they dared engage with these calls, they vanished, leaving behind no trace, no call records, no memories, just emptiness." "And these calls? Where do they emanate from?" I asked, the enormity of my new career starting to dawn on me. Christopher looked frustrated. "No discernible origin. We've tried the police, telecom, even governmental bodies. All were stumped. The test calls haunt only us. Other centers remain untouched." Dismayed, I inquired, "Why would anyone stay? Knowing this darkness that lurks in the shadows?" "In the grand tapestry, these calls are but rare threads," Christopher replied, a note of resignation in his tone. "And someone has to man the helm. If we all abandoned ship, more unsuspecting souls would be lost." "But can't they be traced? Investigated?" My voice was pleading. Christopher simply looked into the void. "How do you chase a phantom?" With time, those cursed test calls, though chilling, became another hazard of the trade. The protocol was simple. Hear that voice, hit mute, let the eerie silence play out, and notify the control manager. No soul had vanished on my watch. And while some fresh recruits left when confronted with this ghostly reality, others, like me, stayed. Some seemed resigned to the 5 seconds of terror. accepting the enigma of the test call as part of the job. Being promoted to mentor brought its own set of anxieties. Not just the dread of the test call, but witnessing a rookie's wide-eyed fear during their first true emergency, guiding a panicked soul through the chaos of a CPR procedure. The gravity of the responsibility weighed on me. Despite the eerie mystery of the test calls, the job's rhythm was intoxicating. The unpredictability of each call, be it a looming specter, a fragile birth, a life ebbing away, or a minor injury, was what kept me grounded. The satisfaction derived from a call well handled and the humble allure of a regular paycheck made the occasional phantom on the line just another part of the day's shadows. Every so often, the enigma of the calls would retreat, allowing me to breathe a sigh of relief. Still, the myriad of voices on the line always held its own surprises. Beyond the eeriness of the test calls, the job presented its own set of peculiarities which, perhaps later, I would chronicle. For now, though, I braced myself for the incoming batch of fresh recruits, praying their initial test call would be quick and painless. To delay would mean weeks under a looming dread. Mischievous calls often punctuated our routine, especially when schools recessed for holidays. With mischief in their hearts and time on their hands, children would dial up the first number their fingers remembered, 911. Knowing the police would instill fear and the fire services might dismiss them, they'd often choose to haunt our line. Although we never preemptively labeled these calls as pranks, distinguishing genuine calls from hoaxes was a skill we'd all honed. The signs were always there, the stifled giggles, fabricated addresses, or audacious claims designed to shock, all before they slammed the phone down with triumphant glee. However, a particular call one evening veered far from the usual script. An innocent, tremulous voice, sounding no older than 3 or 4, echoed through my headset. Her impeccable recital of her address made me play the recording again and again. My heart clenched as I recalled her soft plea. "Can you send Mummy an ambulance, please?" For a moment, my training threatened to fail me. I had listened to recordings where children, in their most desperate hour, had reached out, but never had such a call landed on my line. I flipped through my notebook to the section on handling child callers, seeking guidance from the inked-out protocols. "Can Mommy speak to me, dear?" I gently inquired, half expecting a flustered mother to apologize for her daughter's unscheduled experiment with the phone. Her reply, though, sent chills down my spine. "No, she's tied up." The world around me seemed to blur. Christopher was at my side in an instant, his supervisor instincts kicking in. As he listened in, the weight of the situation grew heavier. In haste, I typed out the haunting words for the dispatcher. Their initial disbelief melted away at the gravity on my face. Amidst the panic, I struggled to keep my voice steady. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Emily." Gathering myself, I replied, "All right, Emily, I'm Natalie. I promise I'll do everything I can to help your mummy. Just stay with me." Her voice wavered. "Please help her." My heart raced, echoing the urgency in her voice. Christopher's hand on my back was meant to be a gesture of reassurance, but for me, the weight of the situation surpassed any test call or even the most challenging emergencies I had encountered. It was a call no operator wished to handle, one that could lead to a heart-wrenching testimony in a coroner's court. "Emily," I pressed, "where are you now?" "In a cupboard," she whispered, the panic palpable in her voice. "It's so hot, I smell smoke." As the weight of the revelation sunk in, I relayed the information to the dispatcher, noting the possible fire. A knot tightened in my stomach. Here was a child, innocent and terrified, seeking solace on the other end of the line. As I continued my conversation with her, trying to extract more information for the responding teams, little Emily's growing fear became evident. The pressure was immense, knowing that the life of this innocent soul, and possibly her mother's, hung in the balance. "Stay put, Emily." I tried to steady my voice, a difficult task given the sheer horror of the situation. "Whatever you do, don't open that door. You're showing immense courage. I need you to keep holding on to it and to this phone line." "Daddy's going to be so mad. He'll hurt me." Her voice was a blend of terror and resignation, haunting in its purity. It was a tone I'd never forget, one that would revisit my dreams for countless nights to come. "We won't let him know, sweetheart. It's our secret. Just please, stay with me," I implored, trying to anchor her hope to mine. A deafening silence followed, punctuated only by our heavy breaths. The seconds felt like hours. Then I heard it, her voice trembling. "It's so hot." Those were her last words to me before the line cut out, severing our fragile lifeline. I redialed frantically again and again, yet each attempt met with the same disheartening tone. Devastation swept over me, and tears streamed down my face. This job had thrown many a challenge my way, but nothing had ever crumbled me like this. The cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and helplessness left me emotionally drained. Christopher, noticing my state, ushered me to the quiet room, offering words of comfort. He reminded me that I had done my best and that our team would do everything in their power to ensure Emily's safety. Trying to distract myself, I watched some mindless television in the quiet room, international athletics or some such thing. Christopher returned after what seemed an age, but the expression on his face sent my heart plummeting. "They're all gone," I whispered, bracing for the worst. He hesitated. Actually, no one was there. Confusion clouded my mind. "What do you mean, no one was there?" "There's a family that resides there," he began cautiously. "But they've been living there for nearly a decade, and they only have an infant, certainly not old enough to converse like our Emily." I felt the room spin around me. But how? The call was so vivid, so real. The trail got even murkier. The mobile number traced back to a middle-aged man residing in the distant Outer Banks. Our location, far removed from North Carolina, made it an oddity for such a call to be routed to us. But why would a call from there come to us? My mind raced to connect the dots. Christopher simply shrugged, adding to the enigma. "The mobile provider has no record of a distress call from his number. It's a baffling technical anomaly." My stomach churned in anger and disbelief. Who would jest about such a thing? To emulate such genuine distress, especially from a child? Christopher could only offer a sympathetic look in return. The day wore on, and as the shift dwindled to its close, the well-being team ensured I was in a stable state of mind. For my own healing, I made a few more calls before signing off, attempting to find solace in the mundane and typical, to remind myself that the darkness wasn't always so profound. Weeks later, despite the deep scars it had left, the mystery surrounding the call had somewhat faded. The technical team drew blanks, and so did the police. However, as with many in our line of work, our curiosity often led us down darker paths, looking for answers in the oddest places, even scanning obituaries to discover the fates of those we tried to aid. Sometimes finding closure, sometimes left with more haunting questions. Such is the life of a call handler, living on the razor's edge between life and death. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, there were times when it became rapidly clear that their efforts were in vain, that the shadows of death had come and gone before their arrival. On such occasions, the obituaries served as a tragic reminder, drawing lines between those who could be saved and those who couldn't. Out of an unsettling mix of obligation and morbid curiosity, I found myself typing in the names of the mother and daughter, linked to that ill-fated address. The discovery that followed sent a chill down my spine. Yes, Emily had given me the right address, but she was a decade too late. The narrative I uncovered was horrifying. The original house, which had once stood there, had been reduced to ashes almost a decade prior. In a monstrous act, a man had bound his wife, coldly slit her throat, and left her to bleed to her death. To finish his macabre masterpiece, he set the house alight, taking both his and his 4-year-old daughter's lives in the inferno. Most of us in the emergency service dispel myths, superstitions, and notions of the supernatural. We believe in science, tangible evidence, and the impermanence of life. But this shook my beliefs to the core. How could a call come from a phone located in the remote Outer Hebrides, especially one that never dialed our number? Why did multiple services rush to a location where evidently no emergency was taking place? It defied logic, and the eerie parallels with the tragic past of that location made my blood run cold. I wrestled with explanations. Was it some twisted individual using sophisticated tech tricks? Perhaps a phone number proxy, if such a thing even existed, to orchestrate this cruel prank. Perhaps someone with access to a young child, maybe their daughter or niece, had coached her, using the tragic history as a script, and they had then reveled in the chaos and fear they instilled in me, and the unnecessary deployment of resources. Another theory that came to mind was, had I dreamt it all? I've had dreams, post-night shifts, where I'm back on the job, dealing with crises. Work has a way of intertwining with life after all. Recalling that experience brought tears to my eyes, and though I often narrated it as a cautionary tale to newcomers, penning it down was a different ordeal. The pain, the helplessness, and the voice of that innocent girl echoed in my mind. The gnawing feeling of, could I have done more, never truly subsided, even if logic dictated otherwise. However, I promise to share a more intriguing tale next time, perhaps one not as gloomy. Being in this job, you need distractions outlets to help you cope with the daily grind and the emotional roller coasters. Some colleagues knit. I've seen one gracefully handling a cardiac arrest call, all while counting compressions and knitting seamlessly. Others opt for more physical pastimes, like weightlifting or even the tangled affairs of passionate romance. Indeed, our workplace sometimes felt like an over-the-top TV drama where everyone seemed involved with everyone else. As for me, I took solace in languages. Compared to the more physical hobbies of my colleagues, I suppose it might seem rather nerdy. Yet there was something calming about immersing oneself in a different language, culture, and way of thinking. It provided a brief escape, a chance to venture to far-off lands without leaving my seat. And ever since I embarked on this tumultuous journey at ambulance control, diving deep into languages had become my most treasured respite. My linguistic journey had not only expanded my understanding of cultures and dialects, but it also made me proficient in 2 languages, with a fair conversational capability in 3 others. Sharing this, I don't mean to parade my language skills or label myself as an eccentric oddball. There is indeed a method to my madness, and it segues perfectly into another tale from the heart of the emergency lines. The story unfolded on an otherwise typical day when a call landed with Naomi, a fellow dispatcher. Even from a distance, I could sense her escalating frustration. With her voice steadily increasing in volume and slowing in pace, it was evident she was struggling to communicate. Her face wore the expression we all recognize, the struggle of trying to assist a caller with hearing difficulties. My attention shifted momentarily back to my duties, thinking how thankful I was not to be in her shoes at that moment. However, the universe had other plans for me. Before long, Christopher was gently tapping my shoulder, a silent plea in his eyes. My reputation as the weird language girl was well established among my colleagues, and they hoped that I might bridge the communication chasm with the distressed caller. Admittedly, my heart sank a bit, thinking of the hundreds of languages spoken globally, of which I was proficient in merely a handful. Would I be of any help? But as fate would have it, the moment the call was transferred to me, the elderly lady on the other end of the line started speaking animatedly in one of the languages I was well acquainted with. I almost sighed in relief, thinking this was where the challenge would end, that I could swiftly dispatch assistance for whatever ailment she faced, be it chest pain or a nasty fall. Yet, her words painted a darker, more sinister picture than I had anticipated. She spoke of her 3 grandchildren, their parents having left them in her care, and something had gone terribly wrong. Their once lively eyes were now fixed, staring, unblinking, as though they were trapped in a nightmarish trance. They're all staring as if they've seen a ghost, she whispered, her voice shaking. A barrage of thoughts crossed my mind. Was I catering to 3 potential patients or just one elderly woman who had lost her grasp on reality? What did she mean when she said she'd done something wrong? Was this a confession of guilt? The complexity of the situation escalated when she described how not just her grandchildren, but even her neighbor outside was fixated on her, his eyes filled with terror. I tried calming her, inquiring about the specifics, seeking any tangible evidence that could make sense of the eerie situation. But every question seemed to heighten her panic, her descriptions growing increasingly vivid and chilling. She spoke of their silent screams, their mouths wide open but devoid of sound, mirroring the mute horror of her neighbor. The logical part of my brain leaned towards the explanation of a senior citizen suffering a sudden mental breakdown. But her accounts were so detailed, so raw and emotional, that another part of me was pulled into her world of terror. Late into many sleepless nights, I've pondered the possibility of encountering a call from Patient Zero, the first person at the onset of a cataclysmic event. This woman's words brought back those haunting thoughts, making me question, what if this was that call? What if at the brink of dawn, the world was poised to face something it had never seen before? In all my years as an emergency call operator, I have learned to be skeptical, to think critically, and to separate reality from illusion. Yet, in the heat of that moment, a lingering thought nestled its way into my consciousness. What if this wasn't just the hallucinations of an old woman? Could it be possible that this secluded farming village was ground zero for a peculiar outbreak? An affliction causing its victims to stand immobile, their gazes vacant? What if it was a neurological anomaly resulting in paralysis or focal seizures? It seemed far-fetched, but there was just enough plausibility to make me question my assumptions. The old lady's conviction was undeniable. She genuinely believed that her grandchildren were in her living room, staring lifelessly at her, and that the chilling phenomenon had spread, rendering her the only sentient being left. The narrative was chilling, but it felt so real that for a brief moment, I thought that if I looked around, I might see my colleagues frozen in place, their faces contorted into silent screams of terror. However, as the mystery reached its climax, the distant sound of a door creaking open rang through the phone. A cheerful voice echoed, speaking English, creating a stark contrast to the grim picture that had been painted moments ago. As the phone exchanged hands, I was met with a different voice, one that was clearer and more coherent. My immediate urge was to confirm the situation in the house. The lady confirmed that there were no children in a trance, only the elderly woman lost in her memories. The newcomer, as it turned out, was the elderly woman's caretaker. She shed light on the situation, explaining that the woman's deteriorating dementia had made her forget English, a language she had spoken for decades, pushing her back to the familiar embrace of her native tongue. The reality of her grandchildren living continents away in Australia further compounded the eeriness of her hallucinations. Her perception of the world was warping, and her reality was far removed from ours. Emerging from that call, after a few deep breaths, I realized the sheer power of the human mind. Dementia had pulled the wool over her eyes, painting a narrative so vivid and horrifying that for a brief moment, it became real for me too. In our profession, it's a cardinal rule never to doubt our callers. For if they perceive it as real, it becomes our reality too. Christopher, hearing about my intent to share some of these uncanny tales, chimed in with his own experiences. Of course, in sharing these stories, we've been cautious to anonymize names and details to keep our identities and those of our callers protected. Except mine, that is, Natalie. It's a delicate balancing act to stay true to our roles while ensuring that we don't breach our professional code of conduct. We still need our jobs, after all. This line of work exposes us to a myriad of calls. Some are genuine emergencies, while others, the so-called boner toners, are darker, those who derive some twisted pleasure from our frantic pleas for addresses or clarity. It's a deeply unsettling aspect of the job. While the world has its fair share of varied inclinations and fetishes, this one, at the risk of sounding judgmental, needs to be re-evaluated. It blurs the lines between genuine emergencies and sadistic fantasies, making our roles all the more challenging. Every call we take, every story we hear, adds another layer to our understanding of the human psyche, and sometimes it delves into the strange and eerie terrains of the mind, making us question the very nature of reality. In the realm of emergency services, certain protocols are set in stone. For instance, while police and fire departments may have the liberty to terminate a call if they find it unproductive, we, in emergency medical services, cannot. This often leaves us exposed to an array of odd and sometimes unsettling calls, which might range from harmless pranksters to those intent on using our service for their darker gratifications. When they hang up and the silence rings louder than their eerie sounds, the aftertaste remains. While it's possible to trace many of these calls, it's not always a top priority for law enforcement unless the individual proves to be a recurring problem. We've grown somewhat accustomed to brushing these off, attributing them to eccentricities or perversions, but there's no denying the discomfort of realizing you've unwillingly played a role in someone's peculiar whimsy. Christopher, always willing to share his experiences, once narrated a particularly jarring tale. The caller had reached out from a landline, offering no address, just a heavy, constant breath that filled the receiver. Trusting his instincts more than protocol, Christopher promptly dispatched help, fearing that the individual might be in dire straits. The ambiguous nature of the call meant that it was treated with the highest priority. For the next 10 minutes, the only sound Christopher could discern was that consistent, almost rhythmic breathing. His multiple attempts to elicit a response were fruitless, and even innovative strategies, like asking the caller to signal distress by scratching the headset, yielded no results. Being in this line of work means we're sometimes privy to life's most vulnerable moments. More than a few times, callers pass away while on the line, their last moments transmitted through the earpiece. These final or agonal breaths can be mistaken for normal respiration, but are merely reflex actions that precede the end. Familiarizing oneself with the different types of agonal breathing can make a world of difference in critical situations. From gasping sounds, snoring, to the dreaded groaning, recognizing these can be a matter of life and death. The potency of these breaths in conveying the weight of the situation is unparalleled. Hearing them is an experience that lingers long after the call has ended. While it's an aside, it's worth noting the importance of learning CPR. It can make all the difference when every second counts. We're trained to guide callers through the process, but having first-hand knowledge always enhances the chances of success. Back to Christopher Call. This relentless heavy breathing persisted, a seemingly eternal loop that only broke when the arriving medical team knocked. The subsequent silence was deafening. Christopher, seeking confirmation of the paramedics' arrival, redialed the number, only to be met with an engaged tone. The subsequent update from the paramedic team only deepened the mystery. The residence, a fourth-floor apartment with only one access point, harbored just one soul, an elderly man who, by all medical accounts, had been deceased for hours. The chilling realization then dawned on everyone involved. If the man had been dead long before the call was placed, who or what had made that haunting call, breathing steadily into the night?